and welcome to the CCDA podcast. My name is Stephanie Ann Vander Lugt, and I am one of the leaders of the Ecological Discipleship Network with CCDA, and I'm your host for this episode. And I am joined today by my friend and collaborator and co-leader of the network, Amy Kuhl. So, Amy, maybe you can start us off by just introducing yourself, telling us a little bit about you and your connection to CCDA and how you got connected to the Ecological Discipleship Network.
Sure. Yeah. Like Stephanie said, I'm Amy Kuhl. I grew up in Michigan, lived overseas, and a few years ago found myself back in the U.S. in the PNW. I work for World Relief, Western Washington, serving refugees and immigrants as the Resiliency Programs Manager. And that really is just a fun department. It's a prototype department where we're, in short, working with refugees and immigrants to strengthen the capacity of our community to manage, walk through, recover from stress and challenge, and grow and even thrive together. So my day-to-day work, I get to oversee a 2-acre community garden and restoration area, environmental education programming, some internships. We also have a commercial kitchen. It's a lot of fun spaces where we can come together as community. My first CCDA conference was in 2024 in Portland. And I'll be honest, I was really terrified to go. I was like, I don't know anyone. This feels like an intimidating space. I'm new to work in the US. And what I found was a group of people who just deeply cared about what does it look like to carry your faith into places where Christ is needed, where restoration is needed. Of course, since I love gardening and everything ecological, I found my way to some of the sessions that Stephanie was leading and others as part of the newly forming Ecological Discipleship Network. And I've heard this said many times about CCDA, but it's like finding your people. So recently I was asked if I wanted to join the leadership of the Ecological Discipleship Network, and I agreed. And it's just been a fun journey of diving a little deeper into what does it look like to integrate care for the environment with our faith, with caring for people.
Nice. Thank you. And maybe I'll just answer the same question and tell you a little bit about myself and my connection. So again, I'm Stephanie, and I'm located in Charlotte, North Carolina. So we are on opposite sides of whenever we're getting together to try to find a meeting. We're always trying to remember what is the time difference. But I lead an organization called Kinship Plot with others, and we're really a grassroots organization that exists to create beautiful places, stories, and schemes of rooted belonging. That's how we talk about our mission. But to kind of put flesh on that, we're in partnership with a church in Charlotte that sits on 10 acres, and they're leasing 5 acres to Kinship Plot, where we are building affordable housing community. Like most growing cities in the US, we have an affordable housing crisis. And so we are engaged in that. And we are also seeking to integrate the housing and the community life with gardens, with an orchard, with a permaculture food forest, which we're also establishing on the land, really with a vision for what does it look like to fully integrate like the fullness of life, shalom, and full well-being, not just for people, but also for the created world. And so we're trying to practice that actually, which is a really interesting integration to, it's one thing to kind of theorize and think about it. It's another thing to really practice it, especially in an environment, I think, where those sometimes have been siloed from each other in terms of what does it look like to really care about the well-being of people and communities and the the human the human well-being, and then the well-being of creation, nature, earth. And it's been difficult sometimes to find where those things come together, which I think brings us to why the Ecological Discipleship Network. And yeah, we are young. Amy said that Portland, so that was 2024, right? That conference, that was our first convening as a network. And we were literally just like, is anybody else asking these questions? And what we found, and maybe you can speak to this for a minute, Amy, in terms of where you're coming from, is that if you look, you will find a lot of people engaged in creation care, environmental justice, earth keeping. But where's the landing spot? And at CCDA, we'd often found that was a gap, or kind of like, where are they? So we were thinking, let's try to create it. But there are many. And I think also the piece that has been kind of interesting is where's the place where we're really integrating CCD and earth care, and it not being siloed. I think, sometimes we can find ourselves siloed in very important issues, but actual full integration of care for the natural world, of relationship with the natural world, along with our community development work. So yeah, I'd be curious, Amy, how, like, what the words ecological discipleship are kind of wordy, but just what does that mean to you in terms of, and maybe even as we've talked about it, but yeah, what do you think of when you think of those words, and of that, like, what we're trying to do together?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I resonate with what you said, Stephanie, about integrating the fullness of life. And so, at its simplest form, I think ecological discipleship really is this caring for all of creation, this recognition that we are a piece of this large ecosystem, like a special piece, but still, what does it look like to engage with nature, with the world around us, to learn and grow in a specific place? Like when God created us, when God created people, He put us in a very specific place that was equipped for our thriving. And I think that's something that we can lose in our very mobile way of life. Something that's interesting in my work, working for refugees and immigrants, World Relief ascribes to the CCD principles. We listened to the community, and a few years back, we gathered refugees and immigrants in our community and posed this question, which you've referenced to, Stephanie, of like, what does it look like to thrive? What will help you thrive in this space? And there were varying answers, but one that came up very strong was a desire to connect to the land for their own healing. So people from all over the world who had found themselves relocated in Western Washington, saying a piece of our thriving is being connected to the environment around us, being connected to the soil. And I think that's something that's really beautiful. And I've been learning more, like, what does that look like as a piece of human thriving? And I'd be curious to hear from you, Stephanie, like, what are some ways, maybe the same question of what is ecological discipleship to you, and then what are some ways that you see that engaging in this space is leading to thriving for you or your community?
Yeah, such a good question. And it really strikes me when we're talking about this, that this is nothing new. And I think that's, like, this is as ancient as our origin stories. This is, I mean, and even like our scriptures,
Mm.
um, it's really amazing that I think, like, even modern, I will say, just kind of modern Western evangelical Christians, how we've been conditioned to read our scriptures, and not see the ecological, not see the agrarian. It is everywhere. It is everywhere. And instead to kind of see it as a metaphor rather than like take it at face value that God has always been in relationship with more than humans. I mean, God created animals, trees, waters, rocks before humans, and like you said, placed humans in those places to be in right relationship, just as
Mm,
God is in relationship, just as they're in relationship. So like flourishing well-being has always been connected to land, to trees, to place, and
mm,
plays a huge theme in our story of redemption. So I do think that, and the wounds of being displaced, the wounds of whether that, that comes from the wounds of a colonial kind of dominator viewing land as something to be owned, as something to be seized, as something to be, this is mine, as property to be owned and to be claimed. Like these are deep wounds, right? And they've been woven into, and they still, I think we still see the signs of it, of doctrine of discovery and those things all throughout
mm,
our modern ways of thinking about all kinds of things and practicing church and practicing our
mm,
Christianity. So I think there's just like a regular and ongoing repentance that is going to look different based on, positionality and kind of where how we've been conditioned to be in relationship with land. But I think that's why the word discipleship, like, I mean, that, any word can be a little bit problematized at any point, but if discipleship is following Jesus, is, living life with God, I think ecological discipleship is saying there is relationship with land, relationship with trees, rocks, plants, animals is fully integrated into that following of Jesus. And our scriptures resource us really well for that. Jesus's own life does. So yeah, I think the thing now, I get really excited about this definitely as a CCD practitioner with kinship plot, but also I'm a clinical social worker and I practice ecotherapy. So I literally bring that in to my clinical practice with people who are recovering from trauma and healing from a whole variety of mental, emotional, spiritual wounds. And the thing that I don't know, it doesn't really surprise me anymore, but it delights me that that the natural world, whether we're out in the forest or we're on the land or we're with the trees, it it facilitates, literally makes easier healing.
mm,
And it makes easier connection with other people and a healed relationship. It makes easier, I will say, it makes easier community development principles. It makes easier crossing regular barriers. It makes gathering easier. It makes all kinds of things easier. It's and I think that that's something that it really delights me to see it happen regularly. In at Kinship Plot, we are building what we call food forest. That's a permaculture term, but essentially it's working with the ecosystem of this small urban piece of land. We watch what already happens. There's a lot of CCD principles at play with permaculture where before you act, before you do anything, you observe. You observe what's happening. You observe who's already there, which birds live here, which native plants are coming up here, which invasives are here choking out the life. What is the light doing? What is the water doing? And so before we ever intervene, we look, we listen, we are curious, we're kind of curious, like, what does this land want to be? And it's very different from a, kind of relationship with land that's like, oh, look, we have this land, what can
mm,
we do here, right? What can we make here? And that making might really be in service to the community and maybe in service to helping alleviate suffering. But I mean, especially in Charlotte and like a rapidly growing city, the words community development actually mostly mean acquiring land, clear cutting it, and building things on it. That's what people mean by community development. So it's kind of an interesting to play with, to 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 bring like an ecological view or open, a relationship with more than just what's going to develop the community for, humans. Though here's what we know, that actually isn't good for humans. And city planners are starting to bring this in, where we know that trees and the life of the more than human world is really important to humans and human flourishing. So anyway, yeah, there's so many examples I could give, but yeah, curious what's coming up for you, Amy.
Oh, yeah, so many things. I was taking some notes as you were talking. I think it's so to kind of step back about ecology in scripture. It's from the very start, as you said. I think something that's been really helpful for me to keep in mind is that when God created everything, it was very good. And that has not changed. Like, God's creation is good. And as you're saying, just in these snippets of examples, it's not just some neutral, oh, this is nice that we have trees and like a good setting, but it's actually for our good, for our
Yes.
healing. And built into the very fabric of creation is the capacity for restoration and healing and thriving. And I find that very hopeful, even when it feels like the goodness of life is being destroyed. It has the capacity for restoration. And I've seen that. And I think, especially in seasons that do feel harder, that do feel like more of a battle, I can go back to a garden and watch things growing out of the most unlikely places and the life that can grow even from things that have been destroyed. So, something that I've just been pondering, the garden where I work here in Western Washington is 2 acres. It was a church parking lot until recently when we actually depaved. So back in the 70s, this church was growing. They had lots of programs. It's exactly what you said of community development being like, let's buy land, let's develop it, let's create all these programs and bring the people in. Very good intentions. And they clear cut the side of a hill, 2 acres. And it actually caused a lot of problems in the neighborhood with a lot of flooding. There's a middle
Interesting.
school at the bottom of the hill that would frequently flood. They'd have to close school. It's a area of the community that's just a little bit more vulnerable. And we know that, like, that's common, that climate change does not impact people equally. And these issues of flooding and all that often do hit people of low income, minorities harder. So, a few years back, when we were looking for a place to build a garden, this church said, here's 2 acres that is covered over in asphalt, but it could become a garden. And
Mm.
we actually depaved a lot of area, which is really hard work. And we've been
Yeah.
doing more depaving this spring, and it just hit me like, this is exhausting
Right.
because it's just like this hard, faithful work of saying, we know there's goodness here. It's been covered over, but we are wanting to reclaim this space. And the satisfaction that comes from that and the life that grows out of that is so rewarding, but it's not
Mhm.
like some easy thing to do. And just again, seeing the beauty of as we learn and grow, realizing like we can use this space for human thriving. Like, we are not exploiters of nature, but we are
Mm.
part of nature. And how do we
Yes.
restore something that we are connected to that has been exploited? I think too, right, like this idea that we really are trying our best to move forward well, and we are not God. We can't see everything perfectly. And In some ways, I do find nature to be forgiving. I find
Oh,
that to be really, again, hopeful of saying in this space, I am creating in the image of God, but also I am not God. And creation around us holds space for that realization, that awe of I am but a small part of something big and beautiful. And that is really important to, I think, like decentering humans as
come on.
God,
Come on.
and recognizing like the true God of the universe is the God who created us and created everything around us and has asked us to care for it. And that's like an honor then to be able to step into that space and say, how do we care for all of creation towards the ends that God has called us to?
Totally. Everything you're saying is really resonating. And the one thing that that's really hitting me again is how is this, the really the wound of the human somehow imagined at the top of some sort of hierarchy, and rather than part of nature, like really reimagining ourselves, not as the master, not as the one who, and this is tough because like the word that is often used in the Genesis account is dominion, which is a very dominating word. And so I think how our translations have wounded us in our understanding of our the place, the and really the gift of being creatures, being creaturely. And we, we're anytime we're reminded of our creatureliness. And let's talk about the hard work, Amy. Like, let's talk about it because it is not easy work. It is not easy work to to be with the land. Like what you've just described as depaving. Wow, it's hard. We also tend wounded land. In our case, the area that we're turning into gardens and an orchard and food forest was an old lake, a spring-fed lake. It's actually a really important part of the watershed. But when the big highway that is right by us was expanded, W.T. Harris Boulevard, they backfilled it with construction debris.
Mm.
And so it's wounded land. We regularly, as we're digging, hit asphalt, hit concrete, hit that kind of, and we're needing to amend. We're needing to bring in, even though there's plenty of dirt, we actually need to create soil. We need to bring in soil. We need to re, you know, kind of bring it back to life because it's like a big wound. But what you said about how forgiving, like it is such a beautiful place that has been
Mm.
dumped on, but it's, the grasses came back, there's a number of varieties that actually thrive in agitated, disturbed areas that are doing well. And so, yeah, and I want to say more about the work because it's hard, but also in these times, like let's talk about how hard these times are right now, spiritually, emotionally,
Mm.
mentally, in so many ways. Something we've really noticed because we have dozens and dozens of people that come out to do hard labor with us. And after a day of sweating, of digging, of planting, of getting dirty, of feeling the endorphins, of being outside, the fresh air, creating something together, everybody reports that they're mentally feel better, emotionally, spiritually. Nothing's changed, right? We're still at war. We still have a massive amount of, distressing things happening through the leadership in our country and in our local areas. But the but the kind of the return to being creaturely, having bodies that are meant to work and labor with and, under the sun, with the soil, with the plants, it is exceedingly life-giving. And we are actually, we're planting actual food. We're planting gardens, ways to feed ourselves. And we still might not know how to do that if, everything collapses, but we are at least trying, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And saying like, this is, we, if like, here we are together, and this is the best we can do. And really
Mm.
blessing our creatureliness and what those who are, and those that are non-human, that are our siblings, as our indigenous brothers and sisters help to remind us, these are your siblings. Yeah, these are
Mm.
relations, not something to to dominate, to
Mm.
control, but to listen to be
Mm.
curious, to learn from. So yeah, so much rising up as I was
Mm.
hearing you share.
Yeah, I think the idea you bring up of relationships being the basis of our work.
Hmm.
We know like relational work is so important, our relationship to God, to each other. And I think we do often end there as opposed to viewing what about our relationship to the world around us, to our non human siblings, we'll say. And so much in our world has taken relationships and twisted them or fractured them or turned what was meant for good into something that can actually cause a lot of great harm. And I think we see that in so many examples, even leaders in the world who take their power and manipulate relationships. And that is leading to the exact opposite of human thriving. And if we're to view nature as a gift, both tangible and intangible, something to be treasured and cared for, it definitely shifts something in our mind of how are we stewarding that relationship. And there's so much, if you just start reading, right, that shows and points to nature as an image, a picture of who God is. So it only serves to strengthen our relationship with our Creator. And I think that is such a gift that God has given us, that all of creation points not just to itself, right, but to the Creator who is good
Yeah.
and has given us everything we need for thriving. And that to me does completely shift then how I come at the hard work of, I'll say, yeah, just like tending and caring for the land. And even when it's hard, knowing that it is good. But we do live in a fallen world. Like that is
Sure.
not something that we can just like kind of forget. It's something
Yeah.
that's very present of the longing for the new heavens and the new world, but also praying your kingdom here on earth as it is in heaven. And what does it look like to create small pieces of like God's kingdom here on earth as pictures of what God has intended? And we need those pictures. We need that hope. And it's, yeah, like you mentioned growing food. I think every time we sit down with gardeners and like eat the fruit of their labor, the fruit that has been a gift of the land, we're reminded of our human need and the ways that God is providing. And it's really genuinely really beautiful. And I think in times like this, so again, I work for refugees with refugees and immigrants. And right now, just so many of those basic human services are being stripped back: food
Hmm.
support, resources, even just the fear that has crept in. And there's a lot of crying out and saying, look, we have needs and we don't know where to turn. And being able in a small way to say, we can still help. There's still space to help provide for our basic human needs. And
Hmm.
God has given us
Yes.
these really basic ways to come back and be reminded that like he will care for us. If he's created the birds and he cares for them, like how much more does he care for his precious children? So I think that's just been again a theme of like God's provision in a broken world and how do we create space for God's kingdom to shine through.
Yeah, it's so good. On that, I'll share a little. story about a
Mm.
project right now that we are working on with Kinship Plot. And you might be familiar with it because I think CCDA has been kind of sharing the posts that we've been doing this Lent on reflecting on the relationship between the monarch butterfly and the milkweed host plant. And so this is just like such an amazing, I mean, talk about nature as
Mm.
teaching us all the time in so many ways, and teaching us about relationship, and teaching us about relationship with God. Of course, Jesus said, look at the birds, look at the flowers. Like they have something to tell you. But what's really exciting, this is actually next week. We are kind of culminating that reflection on learning about this obligate codependent relationship that
Mm.
exists in nature. And we don't like the word codependent in the mental health space, but actually what it means to depend on each other, not in a toxic way, but as in a genuine, like, kind of repenting from independence. Like, talk about the natural world reminding us of our interdependence and our need for each other. But next week, we are inviting the whole community, and Kinship Plot is located in East Charlotte, which has a one of the largest immigrant community in Charlotte. So this is our home. These are, this is our neighbors. And we've been exploring that, like what can we learn from this amazing interdependent relationship. And we're going to have a whole festival, and we're going to plant milkweed, which is the host plant, the only host plant of the monarch, together as we just celebrate like the beauty of migration, which is natural. It is everywhere in the natural world, and the beauty of hosting, and what these species have to tell us and have to show us, what humans can learn from them. I mean, we're not monarch butterflies and we're not milkweed, but they have so much to show us. They don't know what a border is, okay? They know what an ecoregion is, because the monarch knows which milkweed to look for. It knows the native varieties in a certain place. It knows the change of temperature, and it follows those cues to know where it needs to go to be taken care of and to get what it needs. And there's just, there's so much that the natural world has to teach us about relationships and
Mm.
relationality, like you said, not just with each other as humans, with nature and with creator. But
Mm.
I'll say this, relationships aren't easy. Relationships with human neighbors is not easy. We bless the the work, we bless the covenanting, we bless the commitment that it takes to stay in community, with humans. It's not easy. And I think that there's something to say for what that looks like, translated into the hard work of, I mean, any person who's grown a garden, even the smallest little thing, and has experienced the pain of an early frost, or an animal getting all their fruit, or whatever it is, a storm, it can be gut wrenching. It'll break your heart to be in relationship with nature. It will be. Or if you've ever loved a tree and then it gets cut down or knocked over, or if you've ever loved a pet and lost that pet, like these are sacred things. And so I think that there can be this idea. I remember when we were in COVID times, and as gardeners, we'd have a lot of people come to us and say, can you help us plant a garden? And and I love that. And then our first questions to people would be, do you have 6 to 8 hours of sun? Are you interested in watering every day? How do you feel about being out in the heat? How do you feel about, like, just kind of these like questions of, it can sound really nice, and it is wonderful. And relationship with land and with tree, it will bring you to life. And just like any relationship, and especially now in a climate crisis, we're watching, like, our hearts and our lives and the livelihoods and entire communities of people experience the difficulty of what it means that we are entangled with the natural world. So anyway, yeah.
Mm. Yeah, I Lynn White wrote like a really monumental essay, The Historical Roots of Our Ecological Crisis. And he says something that's really stuck with me. Like, what people do about their ecology depends on what they think about themselves in relationship to the things around them, which is very much what you're talking about, right? Of it may be difficult, but is it worth it? Like, what do we believe about what God has asked us, how God has asked us to live in the world? And starting small is smart, right? Like, if you want to begin caring for the world or changing habits about even practically how you live with more intentionality, it's often the small changes, like those daily things of saying, I'm going to shift and think about this different. I'm going to be more careful about some of the decisions I make. I'm going to start growing a few plants, not just totally shift all of a sudden. That's often not sustainable. But the beautiful thing, right, is that both kinship plots and the community garden that World Relief Western Washington has are community gardens. And there's a lot of joy in doing this work, not in isolation, but
Yes.
as community.
Yes.
Which is another just plug for, right, the network of saying we're not the only ones who care about this. We don't have to do the hard work alone. It's something that we can joyfully enter into, like planting milkweed. Like, that can be such a
Yes.
joyful thing.
Yes.
And
Mhm.
and if we believe, right, that we are made for community to like honor God in that space, I think that is a very fulfilling and beautiful way to engage in the world around us.
Totally. And I love that you went there, because absolutely. Actually, one of the reasons that, I mean, one of the big hearts behind what Kinship Plot is doing, and any community garden space, is not everyone has access to land. Not everyone has access to knowledge, or even the time it takes, or all those things. So exactly, a plug for, let's do this together. And even if you want to come once a month, learn about this or glean here, or that when we do it together, it, as with anything, it lightens the load. And that is, and we need each other, and we need that kind of co-laboring, and then the joy that it brings. But I also love that you brought us to, because I know that this is always, oftentimes, the question that's just burning for people is like, so how, so what do I do? So, and I love that question. And also, we we're often, the thing we are doing is asking that question, right? And that is okay. That is okay. But I think what you shared about starting small, I want to emphasize that, and also say that nothing is small. There is no small. I think what we're getting at, and you alluded to this, Amy, is it's almost like a shift of seeing, a shift, a way of being in relationship, a way of seeing who you are in the world,
Mhm.
as a creature, worshiping God along with the trees outside your window, out with the birds that you listen to. And there are definitely things to do. But one of the practices that we offer to people, that we encourage people who are just sort of beginning this, opening up to this idea of ecological discipleship, is learning learning the names. So when you're getting to know your neighbors, what's the first thing you do? You learn their names, maybe a little bit of who they are and where they came from. So the practice is, learn the names of the non-human siblings that you are in proximity to. Oftentimes, we walk past the creatures around us, maybe for years, and we've never known who they are. Now, you can think about your home. even if you're in an urban space, I promise you there is something you walk by. There is a tree, there is a park, there is a bird. If you are part of a church, I promise you there's something green. You've probably walked by a tree many, many times. Do you know its variety? What kind of a tree is that? That bird, do you know its name? I guarantee it knows you're there. And so this sort of like coming to know your neighbors that are not only human, and let that expand you. Like let it draw you in. And if you have access to more natural spaces where you are, and a nature preserve, or a community garden or anything like that, just go and learn the names of things. Be curious. What's your name? What is this? Who are you? And just and let yourself be expanded by that. So that's because this is a reorientation often of heart and relationship. It's more about that than what is it that I can do. But having said that, there are plenty of things to do. So I wonder if there is someone listening to this who is a pastor of a church that maybe has a little bit of underutilized land, or maybe not. Maybe a pastor of a very urban church and you're just concrete in, right? Or an organization, or whoever's listening to this. I wonder how you would encourage someone, Amy, who's thinking like, what do we do? What do we do?
Hmm. Yeah, no, I love what you said about learning about the world around us. You can't care about what you don't know about.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, I even just encourage my staff and the people around me to, like, just go outside, like, just be present in a thoughtful, like, meditative way. Like, listen to the world around you. Listen and feel what is your space there. I think so much of what we do happens like in these sequestered little areas. Like, just walk outside
Mm-hmm.
and let that be a space of holiness that God has created. And
Mm-hmm.
starting there is one thing, and taking people with you. It's easy for us to start living in just like these human created corners, which I think cuts us off from a lot of deep healing and awe. And then I think another way to start doing something, right, is to think again, what has God asked us to do? How are we meant to view the world around us? I think for me, I've always cared about the environment, but I think there's so many systems handed down that I have had to look inward and say, in some ways, I am part of the problem. I am living in culture and systems that were handed to me that do cause destruction. And what does it look like to humbly, confess our sins, right? Because again, I think there comes a point where we feel like we have power and we're doing so much good that we forget that just humbly coming before God, like He is ahead of all creation, and saying, cleanse me of the things that I do that hurt the people around me, like starting with yourself, and then just more gently entering into the spaces. I think we've talked about this multiple times, but again, just like honoring place, like we are embodied people. And what
Mm-hmm.
does it mean to care for the place where you live? The places where we live should be impacted by us because we are present there. It's the same. We are part of community. And thinking about how we step into those places, how we're creating spaces of beauty and belonging where people can thrive, where nature can thrive. Like, what does it mean to us to have a thriving community? Something that I am often just pondering is, what has the world told me thriving looks like? what on that am I just like wholeheartedly accepting without question? And what is it that God has told me is thriving? I think sometimes, even in the space of community development, and
Yeah.
not to say it shouldn't be there, but we talk a lot about economic thriving, like
Right.
this kind of consumeristic mindset of like having more things
Yeah.
means we're better. And I challenge that narrative of saying, is that what God said is thriving? To amass wealth and have access to everything the world says you should have access to,
Right.
all the privileges that the world says this is a mark of success.
Right.
And even as Christians, we sometimes ascribe to those things as like, here's our marker of success. And as a result, we are not necessarily caring for the world around us and the people around us in a way that is honoring to God and honoring to his creation and honoring to ourselves, even. So I think that is something I've really come to God with and said, you are head over all things. You are the firstborn of all creation. I often do not see things perfectly clearly. I live in a fallen world. Help me see your world in a way that leads to thriving, because I know that some of the things that in my mind are my markers of success have not led to thriving. And so just being reshaped by that. And again, really practically for me, I think being immersed in nature, surrounded by a natural order of things that is fully apart from like what humans have created, has actually really been healing for me
Yeah.
in terms of learning how to appreciate something other than all these human markers of success, and just slowing down, living a more unhurried life, being willing to be patient as things grow and change. These are all virtues that do require work and require seeing in a new way.
Hmm. Yeah.
That's maybe a little less practical in terms of like ecological discipleship, but I think it is
Yeah.
truly, it would come from a place of pride to say that I'm just ready to disciple people in ecological discipleship without being formed by God's creation first.
Oh my goodness, absolutely. And I actually, as you were sharing, I kind of thought back to the time of the pandemic, which was so devastating in so many ways, along with being quite bewildering in terms of what it revealed, right? And one of those things was how the slowing down,
Mm,
the lack of air travel and other travel, the kind of being constrained to one place
mm,
and not being able to move about, like the earth started to heal
mm,
in a fairly short amount of time as consumption went down. And I mean, overwhelmingly, humans began to reconnect with nature. Like that was kind of a big theme, and be a little bit returned to. And that is very far from having, I think anything to do with saying something is good or bad. Like these are not binaries, but it was it was a learning that we saw, or something that we learned as as the world shut down, as we like to call it. Other things came to life, which is very, in some ways should kind of continue to bother us, I think, or not, and agitate us, like keep us in the wake of what does this discipleship actually look like? What is costly about it? What might be costly according to our modern lives that we
mm,
inhabit. But I do want to say that you know part of the gift of the Ecological Discipleship Network is that it's a network, and it's amazing to be joining with other people to have conversations like this, and to be encouraged and to be challenged, and to I mean, in our network, I love hearing people's stories and why they came, and it is a diverse group of people who are, a lot of them, looking for community, looking for people to talk to about this, maybe feeling a little alone, in their, maybe their church, and they're trying to start a creation care ministry, and it's like them and one other person and no one else cares. It seems, that kind of thing. Or just asking good questions, but all the way to folks who are this is what they have been doing for years. They've been engaged in this kind of, I mean, for decades even. What I want to say is there is so there as much as we can kind of look at the landscape and feel discouraged or overwhelmed, actually there is so much. There's a lot of wonderful resources, community, people engaging, people leading in this space who are doing so out of their love for creator and for the earth and humans. So, like, to be encouraged, I think that's really why we started this network, was to say, how can we link arms? How can we resource each other? How can we encourage each other? How can we learn? How can we keep on this this path together and help each other stay in the wake and stay joyful and stay well? And so, yeah, I think that's just my plug for, like, join us, join the Ecological Discipleship Network. We are still forming, like, we're still kind of gathering gathering our people. And one of the things that we are hopeful to do, if I could just share a little bit about, this is in process, y'all. So I'm speaking that we're doing this, which means now we have to do it, Amy. Um, we we're hoping to host like a little mini conference, online panel discussion during the liturgical season of creation. And my guess is you might not know what that is, because actually until fairly recently I had no idea that the global church celebrates liturgically a season of creation. And I love it. And it's roughly the month of September. And so it's actually going to happen sometime in there, leading up to the CCDA conference in Richmond. So we're actually hopeful that it can kind of encourage some ongoing conversation then in Richmond for those who are able to come in person to that conference. But also even just a way of marking, like, there's a lot of, we're actually, well, I don't know when this airs, it may have already passed, but right now when we're recording this, we're closing in on Earth Day, and that gets a lot of attention, and that's great. I mean, I love that. How about earth all the time, right? How about our feet are always touching the earth? We are always earthly creatures, and that is our part of our daily life with God, our daily life, doing justice, walking, what are they? Love, mercy. Like Mike.
Justice, walk humbly with your God. Yeah.
Yes. Anyway, so yeah, an invitation to join us for that when it comes will be, I think it'll be coming out through the CCDA channels. We're kind of collaborating together. Yeah. And anything else, Amy? I know we're kind of closing in on an hour here, so closing words.
Yeah. No, I really think, though, out of our network conversations, it's been a spirit of curiosity that has been so helpful to me. Just looking at like a practical approach of community development and ministry work, things that we care about, but reimagined to encompass a holistic, like all of creation perspective, is really life-giving. Because as we seek to help our communities thrive, it it's kind of contagious, like life sprouting, there we go, life sprouting up in one place often leads to this interconnected, like, collective thriving. And I think the curiosity of what does it look like, some of this, again, we're humans, we don't always know, like, where will this lead. Stephanie's talked about so much happening that we might not have even been aware of, but as we come together and new ideas are planted and we start seeing just really inspiring work, I think that is hopeful, because we do see life coming out of this and this desire to continue to see our communities thriving in a very holistic way. So just, I guess my ending encouragement would be, what does it look like to reimagine thriving, including all of creation? Saying
Mm.
ecological discipleship is good because creation is good, because God created it and said it was good. And that is something I can hold on to, a truth that I know is lasting and healing in many ways as I curiously approach, like, God, what is this? What does this say about who you are and who I am in relation to the world around me? Even on the days where it feels like heavy work, where is life springing up? And that truly is a hopeful thing.
Absolutely. That's good.
As I've approached like this topic with curiosity, I've had to really come to the understanding of so much of my own worldview has been shaped in a very specific way. So, reading books by authors who are very different from me, who have had different life experiences, who have different relationships with the world, like our Native American brothers and sisters, or people who have just experience displacement and what does that look like? Because it's a privilege, honestly, just to have so much access to land that not everyone has. And so that has shaped my understanding of the importance of ecology and ecological discipleship by saying there are other ways to think about this, and I want to invite different viewpoints as I shape my understanding of my relationship to the world around me.
Hmm. Yeah, that's so good. And I really echo that. And also maybe uplift the global church and like the global community in terms of relationship to land. I actually told this story in the workshop that we did last year at CCDA, but um, it's a story that is told by I think she was a Mennonite missionary, and she went to a country. She was sent as a missionary to a country in Southeast Asia to a little group of farmers, and like a farming community. And they kind of got to know her and took her in, and she learned a lot about rural agriculture there. And eventually, as they were getting to know her and asking her questions, they ended up sending her back to America. They said, as a missionary to her own people, to tell them the gospel about kind of how God is in relationship with the land. And I mean, that's essentially what she learned. And they were very, very curious about the kind of displaced, almost, and what we talked about in the workshop was a little bit of how the Great Commission to go, this command to go, has sort of been teased out to kind of mean displace yourself, like uproot yourself to go share the gospel or do God's work over there. And it's a very like landless kind of rootless understanding, which I don't think is what the intention of the original command was. But it's sort of how it's been kind of married with that, a little bit of that, that doctrine of discovery and in some ways, yeah, displacement. And so what she talks about is reimagining the Great Commission as a great submission to the places that we inhabit, and to actually come to re-inhabit the places where we are, which I think go completely hand in hand with what we were sharing before about getting to know your actual, the actual trees and the land that you inhabit, which then leads to how, what's the health of the water here? What's the health of, and if as we are kind of repenting in many ways of that sort of go and be rootless and be displaced, what comes in is this this re-inhabiting and submitting to the places and the health, the full flourishing health of the places that we are. So yeah, I think there is a lot to learn, especially as those of us who are maybe coming from a more mobile displaced kind of Western way of thinking. And so, yeah, there's a lot for us in the ecological discipleship space,
Yeah.
I think,
Yeah.
personally, collectively. Yeah.
Yeah. And adding to what you just said, Stephanie, I've just found it so fascinating that the consequence of the very first sin is displacement, like
Yes.
a displacement from land. And that severed relationship is
Yes.
something that we all feel deeply. And part of restoration work then has to account for that. Like, what
Yes.
does it mean to wholeheartedly step back into a place and be present, belong in that, be embodied in a place?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in some of the workshops that we've done, one of the one of the ways that we've had folks introduce themselves when we start is tell us about the landscape that shaped you. Tell us about the place. And it actually ends up being a really moving way for people to introduce themselves to each other. And people say, I've never been asked that question before, but they have so much to say about whatever landscape that is. And it often comes along also with some grief, with some sadness, with something, whether or not they've left that place or now find themselves sort of, I don't even really connect with the landscape I'm in now, or I've been, haven't kind of held on to that. But almost everyone has a story of the original lands or the landscape that somehow shaped them, and which I think really speaks to this is what we're made for. This is what we're made for. And then there's a longing and a sadness that comes with a non-belonging. That how do I belong is a huge question, right? Loneliness and non-belonging. And I think a lot of us are focused on, I'm trying to find a place to belong in a human community, and are, often come up short. Like, oh, I went to that church and I didn't fit in, or I felt like I didn't belong. And that is fair. I think expanding our understanding of what it actually means to belong, and how much the land and the place is part of that, as well as finding your people, right? Because in some ways, I think we have a little bit of a practice of belonging that's similar to like the Starbucks of like, if I could just have that can happen anywhere, right? I can get my favorite Starbucks. It doesn't matter where I am, right? As long as I find and so it's displaced. It's not this place, these people, okay, or these trees, this ecoregion, this planting zone, this, like I have to sort of submit to that in order to belong, whether or not I feel myself, it's going to take time to feel at home in that, if it has been a rootless life. But when it begins to heal, there's so much available to us, I think, with that kind of belonging. I think you know this, Amy, but the last couple gatherings we've done at CCDA, we've encouraged folks to introduce themselves
Mm-hmm.
in that way. And it's been a really beautiful, beautiful practice.
Just a reminder that we do belong to places and we have been shaped.
When we started this podcast, I asked you, Amy, to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about yourself, and then I did the same. Maybe after having now talked as we have in this episode, maybe we want to reintroduce ourselves based on the relationship that we have either with the place where you live now or with some landscape that has shaped you.
Hmm. Reimagining our own relationship with the world around us.
That's it. Who are you, Amy? Who are you?
Yeah, I have been deeply shaped by Lake Michigan, where I grew up, by the rhythms of the seasons, of a lot of flurry of activity and growth in the summers, and then times to retreat and have darker, quieter, restful winters, surviving in different ways in both those seasons. And I think most recently been really shaped by choosing to live out on the West Coast between the ocean and the mountains. And I often go to the mountains just to feel the awe of what God has created, to feel small in a world that can be really overwhelming, and just be reminded that God created all of this and he remains in control of all things. But like a kind of beautiful thing about going to these wild spaces and spending time in nature is like your mind and your body are shaped by this. Like just the pure exercise of going to a mountain peak like brings health. And the joy of walking trails and learning the names of wildflowers that are somewhat new to me has just brought like such a curiosity and a wonder and a joy of discovering things, all fresh. And I've really been shaped by that lately, of just a stepping into something beautiful that God has created as a gift for me. And that's been a truth and a reminder I've needed in a season of just kind of a lot of heavy things where I'm like, is God still in control? Is this world still beautiful? And I have been shown again and again, like God definitely is in control and he's created all things well. And so stepping into those spaces of, just mountain paths and the seasons of tides, the ebbs and flows of things, and the reminder that God holds it all.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. Well, I actually was shaped from my earliest times by a tropical landscape. I grew up mostly in the West African country of Cameroon. So it was banana trees, guava trees, mango trees. It was lizards and, yes, snakes and large insects. And the sun rising at 6 a.m. and setting at 6 p.m. every single day of the year because we were near the equator. And so a lot of beauty in that landscape did shape me. I will say it wasn't until, learning and living into life with the earth as part of life with God and life as a creature has been a process of coming to re-inhabit a place. So it actually hasn't been until we moved to the southern Piedmont ecoregion of, what's known as of North Carolina, where I found myself actually again practicing. Like that was sort of a childhood, because we do that as children. We're shaped by landscape. It's just how it is. And then then there was kind of a forgetting, and then more recently, like a remembering. So it's been a deep part of my spiritual practice to come, like in many ways, come back into relationship with place. And I will say, when we moved into our home in Charlotte, a neighbor who'd been there for many, many years came up and introduced herself to me. And she said, "I'd like to introduce you to a very important neighbor." And I said, "Oh." And she pointed up at the huge pecan tree that was over our house. And she said, "This is the best pecan tree," because that's, she said it, in 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 the city. And she gives every single year. And this is actually how I nourish myself. And what was interesting about it is she was sharing with me her relationship with this tree. I could also tell she was feeling out how it would be for her to continue to come collect the abundance of the pecans now that we lived here, technically owning the land. She didn't ask my permission. She just introduced me to this amazing giver of, and that was a really beautiful, way of being invited to start my relationship with the the land that we are on, which is now, I mean, deeply shaped by the trees, by the eastern redbud, by the magnolia, by the pecan, the birds, the cardinal, the the Carolina wren. I mean, all of these creatures that are native to the place. So yeah, it's been like a long, a long, beautiful, slow love song in creation as I've lived there. And I'm hoping will only continue to be written. So we sort of modeled this way of introducing ourselves just according to the lands, the landscapes that shaped us, and also the ones where we are finding our feet touching the earth now. So maybe you want to practice this with someone else. Maybe you want to bring this to your dinner table or your small group or your friend and say, answer this question, and let's share this with each other, just as a way of knowing ourselves more deeply and each other. So I encourage you to do that. It's a beautiful practice.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to the CCDA podcast. And thank you, Amy, for joining me today. What a wonderful conversation. Really enjoyed this. If you want to learn more about CCDA and especially the Ecological Discipleship Network and how you can get involved, we've got everything you need in the show notes of this episode. And don't forget to subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. This episode is produced by Sarah Callan in association with Christina Four, and we'll be back soon with another episode featuring CCD practitioners who are committed to seeing people and communities experience God's shalom. We'll see you then.